much. Yes, so I've been around and seen a few places, but work as an academic, you work both with research, with education, and with some consultancy or collaboration with industry. And my focus on my presentation here today will be on the educational aspects, the sides of how we build teams and what kind of competences that we need and how we need to compose our team so that we are better equipped to deal with the kind of threats that the cyber world creates for us. But before we start, I think when we think about systems, there are like some reasons for why we do things the way we do. And so I'll take you on a short stroll down memory lane and talk a little bit about how computing came about and how we have some of the abstractions and many of the APIs and ways of doing things that we have in cybersecurity basically are historical artifacts of how we've evolved over time. So when we go back to the 1940s and 50s, we basically had a central computer with a single user. Both the computing equipment and the data was co-located in the same room for the duration of the processing, which meant that we could do a lot of our security of the computational security by simply locking the door to the room and making sure that access to the computer was only granted to people who needed to get into the room. And this is very much an abstraction we have followed throughout, or this is how we've done things for the past 1,000 years with the way that we have protected things by building walls around it. So we could basically do the same thing when we started out in computing. But going forward, we started getting in the 60s and the 70s, we started getting the mainframe computers, the mini computers, and I know these exact boundaries are not precise, okay, so there are overlaps, things are developing on a continuum, but we had these mainframes and mini computers, and what changed there was that suddenly we had several users given access with time-sharing systems to the computer at the same time. So we suddenly needed to find some abstractions for how to deal with security. And this is how we got things like access control, we got things like authentication, because authentication was needed for access control. And all of these things came into existence simply because we needed to have it in the computer domain, in the digital domain. Computers were still expensive resources, typically located in different rooms from the users. So in the beginning we had data and users and computer equipment located in the same location. Now data and computer were located in the same location, but the users were separated out somewhere else. Then in the 80s and 90s we got the workstations, the PCs everywhere. And then suddenly we got like data was being moved from the computer room and the server room out into the close to where the user was. So we got this breakdown of the wall between the where we had previously had computing equipment and data co-located. Now we had in a higher degree users and computing equipment co-located. And then from somewhere mid-90s to today, all this has become increasingly and incredibly fluid. So we have a lot of different equipment being made available to us, and we have this one user that has a lot of computers available. Most of you will probably have at least a smartphone and a laptop with you, probably also, or possibly also a smartwatch, maybe 1 or 2 smartphones, because you could have your work phone and your private phone, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of these things available to us, and there are computers built into a lot of equipment around us. What belongs to one set of computing, one computation is perhaps sometimes shared with other computations. So the whole abstractions that we had previously has kind of like it's broken down. We cannot think about putting things in a room and a lock on the door anymore. We need to think about how we deal with all this multitude. So we go from, the classic security of a perimeter defense, where we've put the wall around it. We've done this for millennia, and it has a lot of interesting or salient properties. So typically inside the wall you have some kind of central authority, or at least some authority that defines the policies for what goes on inside the wall. And then you have some other group of people to police these policies. And then the big distinction is who gets in behind the wall. So this drawbridge, the gate into the enclosure, defines what you can do and what you cannot do. But going forward, or basically the time that we live in now, we have the metaphor of the castle is not really suitable. What we should start looking at is more the metaphor of a large metropolitan city, where the strength of the computing system is not in the way that we've protected it and what it can do on its own, but how it interacts with everything else. And that means that we can no longer have these gatekeepers that control the access to the computing infrastructure. We need to have the computing infrastructure enforce the policies themselves. Maybe they are owned by multiple organizations. So on top of having on top of not having this single authority to define policies anymore, each of the buildings in this metropolis could have their own gatekeepers at the door, deciding who gets in, who won't get in, and how we can share collaboration, or how we can collaborate between these buildings. And this is basically the foundation underneath the zero trust architectures, that we want to foster collaboration, but we need to make sure who we collaborate with, who they are, and whether this collaboration is according to our local policies. So this is one of the ways that things have changed over the past 70 years of computing. That complexity has grown tremendously, because the focus is not on the individual capability of the computer and the data together, but on the way that we connect it to other systems. So when we start talking about security, what do we mean by security? And there are security at many different levels. So when you ask people on the street, what is a secure system? They will typically talk about an online bank or something similar, but not having very strong notions of what it is and what it means to secure the system. If you talk to a university professor, they will have their own domain, and that domain will fit or feature prominently in the way that they describe security. Typically the overall system, or there are a lot of things that are forgotten when we define security for our organization. So I've tried to break this up a little bit by having this is very capricious. Okay. Shouldn't have done so many animations, I'm sorry. This is going to be weird. So we have two organizations that want to collaborate, whether they are companies, whether they are two individuals, doesn't really matter. So the business is not necessarily a financial transaction, could also just be the business of playing croquet together or deciding when to do this or whatever it is. There is some kind of a transaction going on. So when we talk about security from a business perspective, typically there is some kind of step in the beginning where we want to find out who we want to do business with. So we want to identify the possible collaborator for our business. And the way we do this is typically by some kind of an online search, or we ask colleagues, we ask our local business associations, we ask around who are good collaborators in this area. Who do we know about? Maybe they advertise, so we find out about them that way. But how many of you have seen this written into a security policy? How to get this kind of information, how to find out who to deal with. And yeah, you can raise your hands, but I can't see them. I'm sorry, I have this light just in my face. But so all my questions will be more or less rhetorical, I'm afraid. But this is something that's typically not considered, but something that we actually need to consider when we want to run our system in a secure way. Then we need to find out whether we want to collaborate with this partner. And so, of course, there is something about the actual interaction that we want to have, but also we can judge whether they are solid. If they're a going concern, then we can maybe work with them. If they are on the right edge of bankruptcy, maybe we should not deal with them because the risk becomes too big. Of course, there could be an opportunity in that because we would get a very good price and so on and so forth. But there are financial services that can help us assess other people in the business context. There could be reputation systems. That's what consumers are very much relying upon. And there's also recommendations that they get some kind of certification, that they can run different things. So demonstrating that you are good at security is not just something that you do for your own management or for their governance programs or certification programs, but it's also something that you can use actively in your marketing because that will help people have confidence in your organization and may open up for more collaboration. Then you do the actual agreement, and I need to go the right way here. And of course, there is some kind of a deal that needs to be negotiated. There is some kind of a contract that needs to be drawn up and then signed. And there, again, there are some legal requirements. And very often when we talk security from a technical perspective, our notion of security, our notion of what is good and proper is different from the legal way of defining more or less the same thing. So if you ask a cryptologist what a digital or a signature is, they have a very fixed notion of that. Whereas if you ask the man on the road, we have a system in Denmark where essentially we have I guess it's a signature, a scroll mechanism. We have a single sign-on system that allows us to go through a third party, and then on our behalf, because we have logged in and they have authenticated us, they will sign on our behalf. I've just bought a flat with that kind of a digital signature, but it's not my signature per se because I haven't really signed it. I don't own the infrastructure. I have just authenticated to allow them to do that on my part. And so this is something where a lawyer might have a very different notion of what a cryptologist would have. And then finally, we need to, in our collaboration, we need ongoing to monitor that collaboration with whatever evidence we can collect from traces of what we do together. So that would be all our operational data, did they ever actually deliver on the things that they had promised to deliver on? So we can look at the service level agreements or whatever it is and see if they deliver. We can look at, did we pay them what we expected to pay them, and these kind of things. So there's a lot of data that we can look at in that context in order to gather evidence, and they are all part of our secure interaction with another organization, but very little of this is something that a typical computer security department or security professional would be looking at for his own knowledge base, essentially, or from his own knowledge base. Then when we talk about network security, there's a whole lot of things that we need to discuss. There are a whole lot of technical stuff that we do. We talk about network segmentations, partitioning. We talk about all sorts of different security technologies that we want to implement. We have some firewalls. We have all these network detection and response system, or endpoint detection and response systems, and whatever. We collect threat intelligence. We run our security operations center. We have secure services or employ for different forms of secure services. We have identity and access management systems. We run zero trust architectures, and all these things that we will typically see as the big security vendors as their offerings to help us secure our infrastructure. And this is typically, when we talk about the security department in an organization, these are the people that we normally talk about. These are the people that are in charge of this infrastructure that we build for network security. Then we go a little bit further with infrastructure security. When we talk about that, that's the blue line between the two organizations. We need to secure that as well. So we need to make sure that we have a good naming service, that it's a reliable naming service. Maybe we even want to run run it over an encrypted channel so that people outside cannot see who we want to discuss with. The whole routing infrastructure needs to be secured, and we've had these examples over the past few years where suddenly it turns out that all the traffic between two parts of an organization is routed through Russia or China because of the insecurities in the border gateway protocol. So there is a whole lot of things that people need to understand when they set up their system, not internally in the organization, but in the way that the organization meets other organizations around the world. And then, of course, there is the actual communication that we set up, so we need to have some good and strong encryption. We fortunately have the NIST in the US to define a number of standards for us, and they're generally good to use. We need to have an authentication infrastructure in place that we can use, and then typically most of these are also built on top of some kind of a public key infrastructure. So all of these things are not internal to the organization, but has to be out there as some kind of trusted third party to mediate the interaction between two or more organizations. So this is also something that people, when they set up security, need to have need to consider to make sure that our interaction can be secure across organization. And then we need to talk about the platforms that we have at either end. It's like if I point at it, it works better. I'm not quite sure what it is. So of course there is, we need to worry about where do we get our hardware from. This is something that has become quite prominent in Europe over the past 5 to 10 years because there has been a drive to discuss or to question some hardware manufacturers and say that they are possibly under the influence of their government, and possibly they could do something malicious. So Huawei had a very hard time in Europe over the past 5 to 10 years. In the hardware security, we've had stories about chips that were not supposed to be part of the architecture showing up on motherboards and these kind of things. Not all of them appear to be true. We have this whole area of trusted computing that we use to set up secure hardware collaboration so that we know that we actually have these two pieces of hardware that are supposed to work together, working together. And then we need to have the software that we're running on and the operating systems that we're running on need to be secure. So we have secure boot facilitated by the trusted computing infrastructure. Typically there is a trusted platform module that we integrate either in the CPU of our computer or somewhere on the motherboard that can help us make sure that we boot the right things. And then there are all the more managerial things, so things like patch management, making sure that we run the latest versions of software. There was a recent report or white paper from Cisco discussing the Salt Typhoon attack, and where they came up. One of the findings was that essentially people had not read the guide on how to harden their system, so they had been running old versions of software in insecure ways for a very long time. And these were major telecoms providers that were not doing this. So it's something that can hit almost any organization, I guess. We need to consider where we outsource our services, supply lines for these. We have the whole governance, risk and compliance framework that we need to have in place. Who makes decisions, how do we do our risk management, and how do we show to demonstrate that we actually do things in a secure way. So this is kind of like just to show you just the complexity also of a traditional computer. So at the bottom layer we have the hardware, but the hardware is not just the pure hardware, there is firmware on top of that, which is software embedded into hardware, hard to change but not impossible to change. So it gets upgraded on a regular basis, and sometimes malicious software can be built into this. Then we have the set of functions in the operating system that needs to be secure so that the rest of our system can be secure. And that we define as the trusted computing base. So that's the set of functionalities that need to be secure for us to be able to reason about the security and everything on top of that. Then we have the rest of the operating system, and typically when that is running, it's the kernel of the computer running, and then on top of that we have a lot of libraries that we use, and these can be replaced as well. And then on top of that we have the actual processes, the virtual machines, the servers, and everything else running. Many of them will be interpreters. And so we have a very, very complex world where we rely increasingly on things that we get from third hand. There was a number of studies that have come up with like 80% of commercial hardware actually has some open source software in there somewhere. Yeah, that was the trusted platform module. So when we go from this individual computer with all the complexity and we want to go and build systems of these computers, then we very easily end up in this situation from an XKCD cartoon where we build all this infrastructure on top of each other, and suddenly there is some small bit somewhere that everything relies upon, and that we have absolutely no attention directed towards. So this is one of these issues that we very often see in security. So we have all this, and how do we make sure that this is secure? Well, from the applications point of view, we need to make sure that the software is secure. Software also needs to be delivered on time. It has to have the functionality that it has. Security is a non-functional requirement, so it's something that I guess everybody in this room sees as essential, but not it's not the functional requirement. This is not why people buy stuff. So we also need to make sure that we get the right stuff. So the procurement process is quite important, and that is procurement both of the software that we go and buy, but also the services that we have come to rely upon, typically things in the cloud somewhere. And then the whole question of how do we start, because this is something that is growing in all of software development. How do we integrate all business practices, essentially? How do we integrate AI in a way where we do not necessarily send a lot of information outside our organization? How do we make sure that other people cannot train on our data, at least not our confidential data, and these kind of things? And then from a software point of view, we also need to make sure that there is validation and certification. So these are skills that a good software development team would need to encompass. And then, of course, the data, we need to make sure that it's stored secure, that it's transmitted secure. So that has a lot to do with encryption, but also how do we locate things, how do we replicate data storage, do we have multiple servers, and these kind of things. And then there is kind of like going a little bit back to the business security. There's the whole system aspect, looking at everything from a system perspective. So there we need to do risk management. We need to make sure that the people who are working on the systems are the right people, and that they're working with the privileges that they're supposed to have for the work that they're doing. So the HR department is actually a quite important part of the security equation. And also the ordinary people need to be aware of how we deal with security. So we need to have security awareness training and these security awareness programs. And again, if you look at this from a server room perspective, this is not something that you see on a regular basis. You need to build secure enterprise architectures. You need to have all your governance structures in place. I have the integration of AI again here in the system perspective. And then, of course, the compliance that you may have to meet, both the legal compliance, the regulatory compliance, and the business standards. And this is something especially, I guess, seen from at least a European perspective, that the fines that are now being imposed with the GDPR, where you can risk up to 4% of your annual gross annual turnover on a global basis, if you are seen to be negligent with respect to personal data. Now the new Network and Information Services Directive is introducing a similar fine, and this NIS2 directive is something that will apply to a lot of organizations. So it's something that focuses the mind on security and drives a lot of initiatives, because the risk of these fines have become quite big. It also has the perhaps the risk of engendering a zero fault or architecture, or zero fault attitude, that you cannot run any risks of being doing anything wrong, because then you might risk some very hefty fines. And then, of course, there's also just simple business standards that you want to be seen to follow the best practices. One of the things that we do not typically, as technology people, focus on is this whole thing of digital sovereignty has become quite important over the past couple of months in Europe, something that we talk very loudly about now. And essentially we are still in the IT infrastructure talking about where do we get the best services at the cheapest price. But now suddenly geopolitics, so we've run globalization in our mindset, but suddenly geopolitics seem to be rearing its ugly head. towards us. And this is something that we need to consider as well. So suddenly it's not, already with GDPR, it became important for European organizations to make sure that they only outsourced data storage or data processing to companies in countries that have similar privacy schemes as the EU had. So we could not just, one of the more contentious ones was we could not just store things in the US without other agreements being in place. And those agreements were then made, and then, what's this called? Schrems, an Austrian activist, asked the European Court of Justice, is this really good enough? And the European Court of Justice said no. And then they had to make a new agreement, and then Schrems again came to the European Court of Justice and said, is this new agreement good enough? And they again said no. And so we will probably have a Schrems 3 and a Schrems 4 and so on and so forth until they eventually get to either a similar scheme on both sides of the Atlantic, or that Europe attains full digital sovereignty. So this is kind of like a problem that we need to consider when we build our system, because we cannot just do contracts. This is something that we would have done before, just say, yeah, this is fine. But now we need to also consider who we are doing this, where are these companies located. So to illustrate some of how this works, we have, this is the old NIST cybersecurity framework, and it has these 5 phases. And one of the things that we have realized, and which is encompassed in framework 2, is that we need to have governance in there. We need to consider how we manage the systems. It's not just technical stuff, it's also about the overall governance infrastructures. Then what kind of skills do we need? Well, for system development, what I wanted to say with these 4 bullet points is that there are different systems that need different skill sets. So if you're building something that is a cybersecurity product, part of the offensive line of an organization, then you need to have fairly well-honed skills in secure development and know a lot about cybersecurity. If you develop critical infrastructure systems that are ported there, you also need to know a lot about how you protect yourself against different types of attacks. Maybe not as much because as the people developing the tools for cybersecurity, but you still need to have a good understanding of cybersecurity. Everybody else working in IT basically should have some fundamental understanding, because otherwise they can't take it into account. But it's not something where they may perhaps need quite as much, because most of their programming will happen inside an ecosystem that will not necessarily be exposed to the outside world, so may not really be subject to attacks. This is not the zero trust architecture view on things. We still need to think that everything can be attacked if we follow that route. Then anything that's powered by electricity these days, more or less, has a small microprocessor in there. So everybody working in anything that is powered by electricity needs to think about these things. We have the system administrators and the IT security professionals that need to have different skill sets from the application developers, but they still need to know about a little bit about the secure programming practices, because they need to understand what can go wrong inside the box that I have to manage. And then similarly, same type of skill sets is required from the people who work in SOC or work with cyber threat intelligence. And then we have this whole field of governance, risk, and compliance. I come from an engineering school or an engineering faculty and an engineering department. So of course I have an engineering outlook on things, but I realize that these things are as important as the engineering aspects of what we're building. And when we look at it, so business risk management and making sure that you have the correct cybersecurity posture in your organization, You need to understand the business, but you also need to have some financial understanding. If you want to look at the legal and regulatory compliance and certifications, well, then you need to have a good, you need to have maybe a full law degree, very good understanding of the law. You still need to understand the business, and you also need to understand the financial situation and circumstances that you are in. I just got flagged a 10-minute warning here, so I'll skip this one. That was a little bit it was not so important. So when we think about how do we get the skills, where do we get the skilled people to work with us? Then there are different ways that we can get it. So one is from universities and colleges, both third-level institutions and these vocational colleges, and they provide a broad education that can be applied in many different contexts. So even if you get a cybersecurity graduate from a university, they will not be tailored to a specific job functionality. Typically, they will typically have a broader view on things and a broader education. Courses and certifications, there's a lot of them out there. There's more than 400 different types. I've just listed a few that are the ones that we see most prominently in Denmark. Then we should not forget that the place where most people get their security information and some of their security training is on-the-job training, by sitting next to somebody who tells them, well, then you need to do this, and then you need to consider this, or you're discussing different things with your colleagues, and then you get good answers for that. And then for the ordinary employees or everybody working in your organization, you need to run these awareness programs. Few organizations these days run them themselves. They typically outsource this to external companies, but this is something that's also quite important to the organization. And then just to say that this is an area in rapid development because the world is changing so quickly. So there are so many things that become digitalized, and as they become digitalized, the importance of protecting that area becomes bigger, and therefore the security skills in that area becomes more important. So how do we bridge the skills gap? Is there anything really important there? Because I want to get on to the next slide, the mea culpa slide. Just to say that this is not just, I mean, I come from an educational institution, but we are not, probably not the main educator in security. There's a lot of organizations out there. I listed some of them before. I have some of them here. SANSI, SACA, IC Squared. That work on creating education programs and certification programs. There's a lot of companies giving good courses on security. So these are all things that you build upon when you build, and of course all the vendors have their own security infrastructure and training courses for that infrastructure. So when we look at the universities, as you've seen, this is from the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education in the, it's US amongst others. I think both the ACM and IEEE are involved in this. But there, as you can see, there is a broad spectrum of qualifications, also what I've said in my presentation so far. But when we think about all the governance, if you want to hire people into your IT security team, if you hire them from the computer science department, they will most likely not have those skills very prominently in their knowledge base or in their skill sets, because this is not something that's being taught very broadly in these programs. If we talk about all the compliance and legal issues, then if you go to a standard law degree, most of them will not really mention IT in any significant way. So you cannot just rely upon your legal team to be able to advise you because they don't understand the technology underneath it. Then traditionally operations and maintenance in IT has not been seen as very technical disciplines. or academic discipline, so there's not something that we teach at university. How do you make sure that you have proper backup systems and these kind of things? That's not really computer science. It's barely computer engineering. We might have it inside somewhere in the program, but not so strongly. So we very much focus on the classical computer science disciplines and not so much on the other areas, but we need to have employees with all these skills. And of course, few of us has a security department big enough to have like 20 people running around or 40 people running around. So having all these together is difficult if they're embodied in people. Also, they need to be present at the same time. So we need to have more of this broad skill set into all of our employees, at least dimensions of it in there. So with this increasing digitalization, we get like a cornucopia of possible for innovation and optimization of our business processes, but also we now expose a lot of these to risks because they are made available on a broader, in a broader context. Cybersecurity is a continuous process that must be aligned with the goals and the missions of the organization, and the number of meetings I've been attending where we've discussed security of an organization, and then it's just the technical issues and people forget the mission. That's scary in many ways, because we cannot just have a secure organization. We need to have an organization that is actually able to achieve its goals and objectives. We must provide robust defenses against cybersecurity attacks, which means that we need to have fundamental understanding of the technology that we use, both in our security technology, but also in the technology that we are trying to protect with the security technology. And then people need to be able to navigate in this world of secure systems. They need to understand why they have to jump through certain hoops. Multi-factor authentication is something that is creating a lot of raised eyebrows. People by now realize that they have to, but I don't think they fully understand why they have to, and maybe we should help them explain that better. When you think about, so I often ask my students, how many of you in this room have never gone to a party where there was a lock on the door and then you jammed something in the door so that the ones arriving at the party after you could also enter? You knew that some of your friends would be arriving a little bit later, you jammed the door open, okay. And when I ask that question, unfortunately I can't see how many of you raise your hands here, right? But typically nobody raises their hand. We've all jammed doors open at some stage. Gross violation of the security policy. We are messing with the security infrastructure, but this is what we do, and this is also what people will do if they don't understand why these things are put in place. And that perhaps is the most important part of it, or the final point of it is that we need to have all of these competences to run a security organization. We need to have them available at all times, which means that we have to have, whenever somebody is at work, we need to have some of it at work, of all of these aspects at work at the same time, which means that specialists are good, but we also need to have, we need specialists that also have the broader perspective on things, at least to some degree. And that was like the final slide. Any questions?
that was not live. Okay, please make your way to the aisle. We have the microphones here in the middle aisle, as we have had all week. So please come up with your questions for Christian.
Or comments.
Or comments, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think you kind of touched on this topic, but do you see some type of convergence between like academic or academia and sort of these private organizations in terms of the efforts to educate the kind of cyber workforce?
The acoustics is not very good. I have difficulty hearing your question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I did karaoke last night. So I was asking if I think you touched on the topic, but I was curious if you could talk more about when you expect a sort of convergence maybe between academia, universities, and education on cybersecurity and those sort of private organizations that you mentioned, such as like SANS, et cetera. Do we expect convergence at some point to where people can expect to learn these things in university?
So I think that if you mean by convergence that kind of like universities will more or less take over the certification of some of the roles there, I think that will not necessarily happen, because a lot of these organizations, they have very targeted courses. And if you think about a university, typically, at least if you classical Humboldt University financed by the state, then we need to provide something that's good for a large constituency, which means that the courses that we give should preferably be some courses that we can give and repeat to a relatively large number of students for a longer period of time. Whereas some of these, the SANS courses, they can be extremely focused on much narrower topics. They are typically also way more expensive than a university course. So that's part of why they can do it. And I think both of them have a space out there. What I hope to see is that we get more cybersecurity, information security, computer security, network security, whatever you want to call it, degrees from universities, so that we get a larger number of we raise the baseline, and then we can use the more specialized courses for where it's really necessary. And with having this broader skill set, we also get a more mobile workforce. And I realize that mobility, as the way that it is right now, is not very seen necessarily as a very good thing, because it's too much of a null-sum game at the moment. In the sense that companies are headhunting each other or stealing each other's staff. So we need to increase the availability of good security people out there, or at least entry-level security people out there, so that they can be further educated and then build more overall security in the digitalized world. So I think both of them will be there. There will not be a direct convergence, but I think you will see universities in a higher degree meet the challenge of educating the people that need this skill set. I hope this answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question. Any more? I can't see if there's anyone up at that microphone down there. Yeah, we have one in front here. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Marissa. I have a question as a college dropout, actually. I came up through security back in the day, right, in the 90s, buying hardware, doing hands-on work, and like doing an eBay and buying equipment and just learning and growing my way up through security. The current generation of people coming out of college is a completely different type of cybersecurity practitioner from my generation, right, Generation X. What are your thoughts as a person working in academia, seeing these people come up now? They're the TikTok generation, the social media generation, a lot of them that I've worked with, like with interns, have very little hands-on experience with different types of cybersecurity, and it's all academic book-learned knowledge. Throughout the years now, as a professor and working in the industry, what are your thoughts with the new generation, engaging with them and getting the skills that they need to have a practical, successful career, right? Versus just having that kind of academia knowledge, as well as the way that they ingest information being so instantaneous with social media.
So I think the question touches on many things. I mean, there's these generational differences that we talk about with Gen Z and so on and so forth. That's a debate that, yeah, it's there. We can see it. And it seems that the students these days they have a shorter attention span. I think they also maybe lack a little bit of personal curiosity that goes into their to degree with that, where it becomes perseverance to some degree. So when I was, I don't know, 14, I had this old alarm clock and I wanted to know how it worked. And so I started taking it apart until it didn't work.
I did that too at 8. So
and the spring never got it working again, right? So that was broke. So that's why I'm always late. That's kind of like my excuse. And I don't see that same curiosity. So the one thing is that it's much harder because things have been miniaturized and everything is now glued together, so you can't really open your box. I mean, when you had a PC in the 80s or the 90s, you would continuously upgrade it. You get a new sound card, you get something new, and then you would have to install it, and you would learn something the hands-on by yourself.
Didn't map up properly. Yeah.
But now the vendors have glued everything together, so they don't get that experience, and we don't encourage that in a very high degree. And then at the same time at universities, I think that in the chase to go and teach people marketable skills and maybe some of the more theoretically interesting things, like a lot of what's going on in data science and AI at the moment seems to be a big driver for a lot of the things that are happening, at least in Denmark. It's like, yeah, but who would build the machine that you run your Python packages on, right? So we seem to have outsourced the design of graphics cards to a few companies, and then the manufacturing of everything electronic to a few other companies. And so the students don't, because that's not central to our economy, it's not something that the industry asks for in a broad sense, therefore it's not part of the degree programs, and so the students don't get exposed to it, and they don't get this opportunity to pick things apart as part of their studies. We do in our university do actually try to do some of these things. We've had courses where they would build electronic devices and do their own PCBs and everything to try and really build something up from scratch. But even there, we are increasingly looking at maybe we should work with Lego Mindstorm or something else where they can do many of the same things, so we could teach them the principles without actually getting their hands really dirty. And I think that's a pity. But I think it's also hard to engender this curiosity and having people take things apart to find out how they work. I mean, the traditional hacking from the 50s or 60s, if the equipment doesn't allow you to do that.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. We might just have time for one more question, if there are any. I don't see any. So let's thank Christian Jensen for this good keynote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.